So one goal, for instance, of this partnership has been to reduce the drug lag in Japan. That is, the amount of time it takes to get a drug approved for use here. It tends to be about 4 years longer in Japan than it takes in the United States. While everybody recognizes the need for safety, if you're dying of a disease and the drug is available in another country, you want it approved in your country right now. And of course, for the pharmaceutical companies, they have an interest in getting their drugs into the market as soon as possible. And governments, well, they want to ensure safety, of course, but they also don't want to see any of their citizens dying unnecessarily. So this partnership has been working together on this issue. Now, in any partnership, there's some risk. There are issues that the partners will disagree on. And while that's the case here as well, what's interesting is that the partners all realize that working together has greater benefits than the risks of any disagreements. So you end up with the organization PhRMA, which is the trade association of the large American pharmaceutical companies. They're supporting capacity building programs for these Japanese patient organizations. And you have NPOs like Health Policy Institute providing advice to government officials and helping the patient groups to do that directly as well. And then, of course, you also have the trans-prefectural and transnational networks that are created, which also further strengthen the impact of working together. And what's really amazing about this partnership is, while a lot of it is about awareness raising and training activities, there's a key role that advocacy plays in creating this partnership. And advocacy is sometimes said as a bad word in Japan, particularly among, if you're a government official, you might not want people advocating. But in this case, it's about empowerment. It's about shaping the national agenda or the prefectural agenda, and it's about direct communication between all three parties. And so in this case, it's a very positive thing, particularly when it's all done working together. So what makes a good partnership? I think this quote from a professor at Harvard probably says it best, in that the most effective collaborations, you have a clear purpose, congruent mission, you have mutually balanced value, people get something out of it, you have effective communication, and you have deep reciprocal commitment. Everybody's at the table and they want to be there. So the bottom line is everybody has to get something out of it, and that creates the overlap of those circles. And that overlap can come about either because of a common opportunity or a common threat. And perhaps another way to look at what partnerships are is to clarify what they are not. So one thing they are about is they're about pooling the resources. And that means the sum of all the different resources that are brought together to fight a problem. And that can be money, technical expertise, networks, research and development, many other things. Sometimes the partners will agree to put the money all into one fund, and sometimes they don't actually exchange funds, but they just agree to spend in parallel. What partnerships are not about is fundraising in the traditional sense of you give money to me. Now, a lot of NPOs will call their fundraising programs partnership programs because it sounds better. And there is an element of both in those concepts. But a partnership, if a partnership's just about fundraising, it's not really a partnership because of this next point, and that is that a partnership is about developing a relationship, while fundraising is basically just a transaction. A relationship goes much deeper to include understanding of what the motivations are that each party has, and respecting those motivations and respecting what each other can do and cannot do. So they are about finding mutual advantage, but they are not about taking advantage of each other. But most of all, what partnerships are about is just communication, communication, communication. Now, I want to leave a lot of time for the discussion, so I won't go over this slide in a lot of detail. What I basically want to show you is that while the fact that we should all work together might sound like common sense to you, in reality it doesn't happen all that often. It doesn't happen automatically, and it is a lot of work. In fact, it's a whole process. Now, there are many different diagrams you can find of the partnership life cycle. Some of them have 5 steps, 6 steps, 12 steps, 20 steps. I mean, here, this is just an example, sort of a hybrid example. And we can discuss this in more detail later. But as you can see, it basically starts with scoping the question, getting the partners, identifying them, and all the way through to deciding whether you've accomplished your goals and you dissolve the partnership, or whether you renew the partnership and take on another issue. So in working in and around Japan for the last 20-some years, and talking with people this year as part of my research, there's a perception that in Japan these kind of 3-way partnerships would be hard because the relationship between the government, corporations, and NPOs is not one of equal places at the table. The perception is that to the extent there's a dialogue going on, it's between government and business. And if there is any NPO conversation, it's the little circle down in the corner. And maybe the government talks directly to the NPO, or the business talks directly to the NPO, but there's very little of a 3-way conversation going on at once. Now, we can debate if the government circle should be bigger on this slide, or if it's changed over time. But I don't think too many people disagree that when it comes to working on the major issues facing Japan, up to now, it's largely fallen to corporations and governments to have that discussion. The question is, will this change in Japan? And my belief is that, like almost everything in life, it's just a matter of timing. So to think about timing, we've got to look at where each of these sectors are right now in their individual evolution and their ability to engage in partnerships. I'm going to talk about this in kind of a global context, and then we can discuss the specific case of Japan. So this slide starts out with the relationship between corporations and NPOs and how that has changed over the years. Traditionally, if there has been a relationship, it's largely been started off as charity. Philanthropic corporate donations given to community groups. That's been the start of these relationships in almost every country. About 10 or 15 years ago, some of the leading corporations started shifting away from some kind of generic charity, though, to focusing on programs that were related to the core competencies of the company. And let me give you an example about that. I used to work for Microsoft. When I joined Microsoft, a lot of the corporate philanthropy was, well, almost everywhere, and anything. But then there was an effort to focus that relationship on issues and NPOs that dealt with topics that were related to the core competencies of Microsoft. And Microsoft's core competencies are innovation and software. So instead of, for instance, giving a grant to a women's university, it would be a grant to a women's university to develop an IT education program.